All right, we are back here talking New York Giants football on the Just End Suffering podcast. Join me today, I've had him on a couple times before, the editor of the Giant Insider newspaper and co-host of the Giant Insider podcast, Jerry Foley is here. Jerry, how are you?
Good, Mike. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, good to have you on here. I figured good time to catch up with the Giants on their bye this week. And the first half, not what most fans are hoping for here. So what was your overall take on what the Giants did in the first half of the year?
I mean, it was like a tale of, I don't know. It was a tale of two halves of a half. You know, the first 5 or 6 games, the offense looked like it was, I mean, other than game one, it looked like it could function. And then all of a sudden, the defense starts playing the way we thought it would in preseason, the last 3 games. And the offense is kind of struggling now. And a lot of that's because of the injuries. And, you know, the offensive line is in shambles right now with Thomas out and Lemieux and Gates. And, I mean, they've just suffered tremendously. And it was a big question mark coming into the season. So, you know, that unit had so many question marks coming in, and now most of them are hurt, other than, like, Will Hernandez, right? So I just think that finally the defense is playing the way we expected. It's just that the Giants are still trying to figure out how to win. And if they could have just beaten Atlanta and Washington, or just Atlanta, you know, they'd be in decent shape right now at 4-5. I'm not saying they're out of it at 3-6, but they would be in such better shape at 4-5. So overall, just C-, disappointing right now overall.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, because it's just one of those things where you look at what the state of the NFC is outside those top 5. There's such an opportunity here. And you're right. If they won one of those games against Atlanta or held on against the Chiefs or Washington or even beaten Denver week 1, they still got a much different story right now.
Yeah, everybody says, though, they could be 6-3. And I guess they could. But realistically, they could be 5-4. That's where they probably should be. They should have won that Washington game. They should have won the Atlanta game. And you can make the argument they could have won the Chiefs game, but you know, just the way it works, you probably would have lost one of them. But the Washington game and the Atlanta game were there, and they were inferior teams. I still say they're inferior teams. The Giants play Atlanta again. I think they actually smoke them. So it's a matter of, and Chris and I always talk about this, it's when you play a team more than who the opponent is, right? So when the Giants played the Chiefs, you know, preseason, you look at the Chiefs game, you're like, oh, that's a loss. Well, by the time they played the Chiefs with the issues they have on the offensive line and Mahomes having the year he has, it's like, well, the Giants can win this game. So I just feel like they should be 5-4. And if they were, I think Giant fans would feel pretty good going into the second half, which is, or second 47%, whatever you want to call it now. It's not really a half of the schedule. I'm feeling pretty good because it's not as daunting as the first part of it was.
Yeah, for sure. I want to take a look at the offense here, because you mentioned there's a lot of injuries along the line. I mean, Saquon Barkley's been out for a while. The receiver's been out of the lineup. But they've had some moments here. What do you think about the Giant offense so far? How do you think they've done? Despite
the injuries, they've done okay. I mean, Jason Garrett, it's funny, man. There's such hatred of him in social media and among Giant fans. But then he goes and he calls a good game. It's just that he doesn't seem to back them up, right? He calls a good game, then he falls into his old habits. And then he calls a good game, and then he doesn't. So, you know, I don't think he's going to be back next year. I shouldn't say that. I think there's a 50-50 chance he's not back next year. But the Giants they really only had all their weapons for the New Orleans game, and look what happened, right? Look how explosive they were. So they've managed to get through 9 games, and you just want to see more. You want to see Tony with the ball more in his hands. Daniel Jones looks like he can be the quarterback, but you know, we talk about it on the podcast, like he leaves you kind of wanting more a bit. Like he's a good quarterback and he's more careful than he used to be, but he has to take that next step and say, you know what, to the point where you say, you know what, this is the guy, this is the franchise. We're going to go forward with him. We're going to build around him, over the next few drafts and really solidify the offensive line in this offense. But I guess my point is, despite the injuries, they've done okay. It's just they still have you wanting more from them, because even when guys like Tony, Ingram are healthy, they're just, they're okay. They're not really moving the ball the way we had anticipated.
Yeah, that's certainly true. And the Daniel Jones situation is fascinating, too, because obviously they make a decision on him at the end of this year with whether or not to pick up the 5th-year option or not. And he's played pretty well for the most part. He's had occasional turnovers, not nearly as many as last year, and he's played pretty well. But Have the Giants see enough here, you think, to say, oh, this is definitely the guy? Or is there a point here you say, oh, he's good, but he has a ceiling we have to try and plan around?
Yeah, I really think you're going to see in these last 7 games. I think they obviously want him to be the guy, but you don't know what's going to happen with Dave Gettleman, right? I mean, I don't want to jump subjects, but if Dave Gettleman's not back, the new GM may come in and say, you know what, we're going in a different direction at quarterback. This is not the guy that I want. So there's so much in flux. There's so many moving parts with this organization. I think it's going to take the rest of the season before you can definitely say, okay, this is the guy. And even then, who the hell knows what the next GM says? So if Gettleman comes back, which I really don't think he will, then they're probably going to stick with Jones. But the new GM, I have no idea who it is, and we have no idea what direction he'll go.
Yeah, before we get to Gell, I want to get to the defense, too, because the defense was so good last year, and then it was like a dumpster fire the first 6 weeks of the season. Particularly those Cowboys-Rams games back-to-back are awful. Then I don't know whether it was Sam Darnold showing up and giving them a bunch of turnovers to build their confidence. All of a sudden, they played great the last 3 games. What's the big turnaround you've noticed here?
The secondary's playing way better, right? Adoree Jackson has played up to what we thought he was going to be. They now have another corner opposite Bradbury, and Bradbury struggled early on too. It's really the secondary that it was almost a foregone conclusion that they were going to be very good. They should be one of the best in the league. I mean, the 3 safeties they have with Julian Love being the 4th. That right away, you look at that on paper and you think, man, these guys are set up nicely. Then you got Bradbury and Jackson, and then, Darnay Holmes, you had the rookie Aaron Robinson, who's now finally starting to play. Like, they're loaded. But for whatever reason, early on, they were slow to react to things. They were playing a lot of zone, and it wasn't working. They weren't closing the windows, as we say on our podcast. And there was no pass rush. Like, the best gift you can give a secondary is pressure on the quarterback. And they weren't getting there. And now, don't look now, but Leonard Williams has 5.5 sacks. Azeez Ojulari has 5 or 5.5, I believe. There is somewhat of a pass rush. They still need a marquee primary guy, but the pass rush has come on as of late, and Dexter Lawrence seems to be playing better now. So I just think it all kind of came together at once. The pass rush came about, and then the secondary started playing way better than they were early on in the season.
Yeah, it sort of makes some sense. I want to get to guys, the 2 big guys who have their futures in question here with Dave Gettleman and Joe Judge. Gettleman seems like the easier one. I feel like unless they have the massive turnaround here and somehow make the playoffs, I think he's a goner. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Yeah, I don't see how the Giants can even be 8-9 and say we're headed in the right direction with Dave Gettleman, because you look at you look at not only some of his free agents, but I mean, he's hit on some, but you look at the drafts, and I mean, look, Barkley's hurt, but he's still a number 2 overall. But then you start looking at Lorenzo Carter. He hasn't done anything. BJ Hill traded away. Kyle Lauletta gone. Like that 2018 draft, like Will Hernandez right now is the best of that draft, and that's insane. If you think about, last year, the year before that, Will Hernandez is probably the steadiest and most likely to get a second contract out of that draft right now. Then you look at 2019 and you got Daniel Jones. Okay, we still question mark. Dexter Lawrence looks pretty good, right? O'Shane Zimmerman is a disaster. He makes Lorenzo Carter look like Lawrence Taylor. Like, he hasn't done anything. And you just go through these drafts, and Darius Slayton's okay. Then you go to 2020, and you see, Andrew Thomas was a good pick. Xavier McKinney was a good pick. Pert's still a question, but we think he was good. Holmes, Carter Coughlin, like it seemed to get better the last couple years, but early on, to the 2018 draft, which you judge a draft 3 or 4 years later, and I just feel like sometimes we're feeling the effects of that now. Like Lorenzo Carter and BJ Hill should have been something. One's off the team and one does nothing, right? I missed DeAndre Baker, I believe. DeAndre Baker was drafted. That's a complete and utter disaster. So he's just missed too much. And most importantly, he hasn't built the line like he said he was going to, or what was expected of him, and it's year 4.
Yeah, the line thing's definitely a big problem. I mean, the first time he came in here, he was like, oh, I got to get the hog mollies. You got to have the line humming here. And feels like Andrew Thomas with his first pick last year might have been the worst of the 4 tackles that went in that first round. Then you have all the other guys who have not lived the hype, and that's sort of going to seal your fate.
Well, in fairness to Thomas, he was playing really well this year, right? So last year, yes, but this year he looks really good. The problem is when he came on, right? I'm trying to think. He signed Solder to that massive contract. Now, I actually understood why he signed Solder because we had Eric Flowers, but then he brought in Patrick Omame. Like he drafted Will Hernandez in round 2, high in round 2. He didn't work out really till now. And I'm trying to think of that line back then. Like it wasn't good. And okay, that's year 1. Then year 2, the line's actually you could argue the line's worse, right? Like he just didn't build it up. And then this year. Last year he drafted Thomas and Peart. And Peart's still a question mark. He could be good, but, you didn't draft anyone this year, and you had a chance at Rashawn Slater. So the fact, I still don't understand how he didn't draft one lineman. Maybe you liked Tony and you wanted him in round 1, fine. But there were linemen to be had throughout the entire draft that he didn't pick. And, if you think we're crazy, when you look at the end of training camp, the starters were, it was Thomas, Lemieux, Gates, Hernandez, and Peart, and with Solder backing up. That's the only constant. Everyone else was moved. So everybody else they had on the roster, they got rid of, and they brought in new guys. They traded for Billy Price. They brought in Skura. So there was zero depth to go along this offensive line. That's all on Dave Gettleman, all of it.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like Gettleman's the easy one. The harder one is Joe Judge. I feel like the blue was caught the rose a little bit from year 1 to year 2, or last year everyone was saying, oh, they're competing hard, they have a good identity. And then this year, he's making questionable challenge choices. He's blaming headsets when things are going wrong with clock management. His team is supposed to be disciplined, and they're committing penalties at the worst time. So what do you think about Joe Judge here? And do you think that John Mara would still hold on to him even if he lets go of Gettleman?
Well, you have to think, like, if they let go of Gettleman, will it be a condition for the next GM to keep Judge? I don't know. I don't know what John Mara's thinking. I hope they keep Joe Judge. They play hard for him. The way they're rallying right now, and I know it's one game, but 2 of the last 3 they've won. They beat Carolina. They lost to the Chiefs, but then they won this past week against the Raiders. They are playing for him. And yeah, you're right. His use of timeouts is careless and almost borderline irresponsible this year. But overall, I think my biggest issue with Joe Judge is his unwillingness to move on from Garrett. But I don't know if that was because, John Mara, hired Garrett, and I think he interviewed Garrett before he interviewed Judge. So there's a lot of things Judge does that are annoying, but I still believe he's the right guy going forward. If there's another GM, I hope they keep Joe Judge as coach of this team. I think he's got the Giants on the right track, and I think they, most importantly, play hard for him. And I do like, Patrick Graham as the defensive coordinator, so everything he's kind of done there. I never once blamed Patrick Graham when the Giant defense wasn't playing well. There were a couple of things he could have done better, but Patrick Graham is a great defensive mind. So there has been more that Joe Judge has done right than he's done wrong. I guess that's my point.
Yeah, it's certainly a fair point. My counter would be, obviously, I'm coming from a Jets background here. I remember this sort of happened in 2013 when the Jets moved on from Tannenbaum, brought in Idzik, and then you had different timetables where Rex Ryan was trying to win to save his job, and Idzik was trying to take the long term, and they both end up gone in 2 years. So that's the risky sort of run, I think, in my opinion. If you keep Judge who's trying to win in year 3 and bringing a GM who has a long view, because they got to rebuild this whole thing.
Yeah, that's the danger, right? And that's the example that you have to look at, and you think, oh my God, are we going to make the same mistake the Jets made? This has been done already. So, if I had to guess, there is going to be somewhat of a condition. I have no idea, but I would think that they're going to bring someone in who is on board with Joe Judge, and to a lesser extent, Daniel Jones. That's what I'm predicting and guessing.
All right, that's the far future. Let's go back to the near future now. They're coming off the bye here. They're going down to Tampa in week 11 here. The schedule the second half, I think, lightens up considerably. Look at who they play. Like, Do you think they can make a good run here in the second half? Not even make the playoffs, at least keep things interesting down the stretch here.
I used the quote from Hoosiers when they made the semifinals, and Gene Hackman was like, the dream of making the finals, something to this effect. The dream of making the finals it's a dream, so let's just leave it where it is. And I think that's the approach the Giants have to take. Like, it's 1 week at a time. I think if they beat the Buccaneers on Monday night, having 2 weeks to prepare, with looks like Barkley coming back, Galladay maybe healthier, then I get excited. They have to beat the Buccaneers for this to be anything. If they go to 3-7, it could happen, but for all intents and purposes, it's over, right? So you got to beat the Bucs, and then you got the Eagles, who they don't really scare anybody, right? And the Giants got off that hump last year by beating the Eagles. So, and I'm sorry, but the fact that the Eagles quit last year and put in their backup quarterback, that still stings, right? Peterson's gone, Wentz is gone, but that's still a thing, and I think the Giants will be reminded of that. But before any Giant fan gets excited, they got to beat the Buccaneers on Monday night, or really 3-7. It's too tall a task.
Yeah, I think it's certainly a must-win game for the Giants. And Tampa Bay does have some issues. Antonio Brown is hurt right now. Rob Gronkowski's hurt, might be out for a couple more weeks. So there's a spot to get Tampa. This is probably the time.
It is, and look, with the offensive weapons coming back, that definitely helps, right? The defense playing as well it is. The fact you have 2 weeks to get ready for them, that should help. So if there was a time, they played them tough last year. They were up in that game. They only lost by 2. I'm not afraid of the Giants. Aren't afraid of Tampa Bay. This isn't we always joke like this isn't the 78 Steelers they're going against. So, it's definitely a winnable game. All these games are winnable. Like, that's the beauty of the NFL, man, this year. Like, look at Jacksonville beating the Bills. Who the hell saw that? So, yeah, if there was a time to play them, I think it's now.
Yeah, I would agree. Jerry, thanks for all the time. I really appreciate it. Before I let you go, I'll be a follow on social media. Keep up with what you're doing with the Giant Insider newspaper and podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. www.thegiantinsider.com for the newspaper, and then the podcast. We're on all platforms, iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, you name it. And Twitter account is @GiantInsider.
All right, Jerry. Thanks for all the time. I really appreciate it.
Bye, bud.